top 10 deadly pandemics of the past. A pandemic occurs when a disease turns into a global outbreak. The recent coronavirus COVID-19 is now considered a pandemic. The deadly virus is affecting people all over the world. 10. Leprosy. The Middle Ages. Leprosy, aka Hansen's disease, is a slow-developing bacterial disease that can lead to damage of the nerves, skin, eyes, and respiratory tract. Those infected by the disease may experience poor eyesight and muscle weakness. Some patients can no longer feel pain, which may result in the partial loss of extremities. The disease has affected humans for thousands of years, but it became a pandemic in Europe during the Middle Ages. 9. Russian flu. The Russian flu, aka Asiatic flu, was a deadly influenza pandemic that killed approximately 1 million people around the globe. The outbreak started spreading in 1889 and was the largest 19th-century epidemic of influenza. It was also the first true epidemic that happened in the era of bacteriology. The initial cases were reported in Bukhara in Central Asia, Turkestan, Athabasca in northwestern Canada, and Greenland. Within 6 months the disease had infected St. Petersburg, Russia. Only 4 months later, the influenza had spread throughout the Northern Hemisphere. Rapid population growth in urban areas across the globe helped to create a pandemic. 8. The Third Cholera Pandemic. The deadliest of the 7 cholera outbreaks was the third major outbreak that lasted from 1852 to 1860. Just like the first 2 pandemics, the third originated in India and spread throughout Asia, Europe, North America, and Africa. In 1854, the worst year, cholera killed 23,000 people in Great Britain. Approximately 10,000 of those victims were from London. During the third cholera pandemic, about 1 million people lost their lives. Many deaths came from Russia, Chicago, Tokyo, Spain, Venezuela, and Brazil. Contaminated water was thought to be the cause of cholera. 7. Smallpox. For centuries, smallpox was a menace in Europe, Asia, and Arabia. 3 of every 10 infected people died. The first European explorers brought the virus to the New World, where people were not immune to the disease. The people of modern-day Mexico and the United States saw death rates much higher than those of the Old World. 6. Antonine Plague. One of the deadliest pandemics in history is also one of the oldest. The Antonine Plague occurred in 165 to 180 and ultimately took the lives of about 5 million people. The Romans brought the disease back home with them after a war with the Parthians. The disease started in Asia Minor and then spread to Greece and Italy. For the next 2 decades, the Roman Empire saw an outbreak unlike anything they had ever experienced. 5. Asian flu. In the 20th century, the second major influenza pandemic was the Asian flu of 1957, aka the Asian flu pandemic. The outbreak was responsible for more than 1 million deaths. At the beginning of the Asian flu pandemic, the virus spread throughout China and the surrounding regions. Months later, the flu had reached the United States and was widespread in the United Kingdom. 4. The Great Plague. As part of the Second Plague pandemic, the Great Plague of 1665 caused leaders to close all public entertainment and seal the sick in their homes to help prevent the spread of the disease. In all, London lost roughly 15% of its population. Although the city recorded approximately 69,000 deaths, the actual number is believed to be over 100,000. 3. Black Death. One of the most devastating pandemics in history was the Great Bubonic Plague, aka the Black Death, in the mid-1300s. A deadly outbreak of the bubonic plague started in China in the 1330s. As the country was one of the busiest trading nations, the disease quickly spread elsewhere. By 1347, the Black Death had arrived in Europe after several infected ships docked at Messina, a Sicilian port. Just 5 years later, the plague had killed over 20 million people in Europe too. The Third Plague Pandemic. In 1855, during the Xianfeng Emperor's reign of the Qing dynasty, the Third Plague Pandemic began in China. This deadly bubonic plague eventually traveled through India and Hong Kong, killing at least 12 to 15 million people. India suffered the most casualties with more than 10 million deaths. 1. Spanish flu. The deadliest flu pandemic in history started in 1918 and infected about 1/3 of the world's population, or approximately 500 million people. Although estimates vary, it is believed that the Spanish flu killed about 50 million people, including almost 700,000 Americans. The first wave of the influenza occurred in spring 1918, and it was generally mild. The second wave was highly contagious and hit the world with a vengeance. Thanks for watching. Support my channel with like and subscription.